Hi, my name is Dave Burchett, and I am honored to be here with my friend and my pastor, Jeff Denton. And today, we're here to try and capture some of the wisdom of Pastor Jeff. This is going to be a short video.
Be very short. I didn't know there was wisdom involved with it, or maybe I wouldn't have agreed to this.
We're going to break this down into 3 sessions: life lessons, leadership lessons. Then we're going to ask you about the flock that you have shepherded at Waterbrook. So let's get started with our first question. Who was the first mentor or teacher who impacted you in your early life, and how did they do that?
Well, I think immediately of Pastor Ed Hahn, who came into my life in my middle school years and was my pastor at First Baptist Moweaqua, Illinois, our little sort of small town church through those middle school, junior high, and high school years. And he impacted and really made me into the teenager, then the young man, and even the pastor that I became. Ed Hahn taught me about, he's a pastor who did puppets. He did a magic trick in a sermon. He would be entertaining. He did clowning and stuff and told jokes. And he was the first pastor I'd ever seen who came out from behind the pulpit that we knew, oh, he's wearing pants behind there. That Ed Hahn influenced me, that a pastor could drive a motorcycle and be different than what I had thought a pastor was before.
What lessons did you learn as a young person that helped mold you as an adult?
You know, probably, and learning the hard way, humility, that at the times where I thought I knew the answers and would embarrass myself by revealing that I didn't. And I think back to those times, and I think that taught me a real humility. Now, it was sort of the long way around. I had to learn by being hurt. I had to learn by being called out on some things. But in those early years, to learn that you don't have all the answers was a big deal to me. And I was always surrounded by people who were very wise and who had the answers, and I just had to be willing to ask for them.
How did the friendships as a young person influence your emotional and even spiritual growth?
Well, my mom and dad had an open home, and so our house was open, the doors were unlocked, and we were home to a lot of, especially during my teen years, a lot of other teenagers who didn't have maybe a good, healthy home life, or who lived with grandparents or didn't have siblings, were an only child. And a lot of those teenagers spent time at our house, and they became surrogate brothers and sisters for me. And my sister, you know, we had this nucleus of our family, but it was not uncommon for us to come home and there would be a couple teenagers in our house with a frozen pizza in the oven. That's how open my mom and dad were with their house. And that taught me, they just learned to accept and love everyone whose path they crossed. And it built into me the ability to love anyone, anywhere.
You may have already answered this question, but about your mom and dad, but what are some other things that they did well that maybe you didn't appreciate until later in life?
Well, my parents both had a great work ethic, and mom always worked, dad worked very hard. You know, at times, it's where my workaholic sort of tendencies come from, because I can see the negatives of it, that, you know, I was taught the value of a hard day's work. And you don't give up, and you keep going, and you work hard to do the best you can at what you're doing. And my parents modeled that, they taught that, they expected a lot of us, and at times that was some pressure to carry. But as I've gotten older, I very much appreciate what they were modeling for me in teaching us to be diligent about what we do, to do your best at what you do, to treat people like you wanted to be treated.
You know, I think most of us deal with insecurities as a young person. What insecurities did you have to deal with, and how did you navigate those?
Well, I never felt good enough. I think many teenagers, especially in those teen years, you compare yourself to other people. I didn't grow up in the age of social media and things like that. I'm very grateful for that, because I can't imagine what it would be to measure myself against a global community. I just knew that in my little high school in Moweaqua, Illinois, where K through high school were all in one building, I knew the kids that were smarter than me. I knew the kids that were more athletic than me. I knew the kids that were more talented than me. And you compared yourself against everyone, even in that kind of a small community. And it drove me to always think I needed to be better. Always think that there was a better version of me because I want to be the best at that, or I want to be the one who is, and it's not until years later when you're talking to those old schoolmates and you realize they had the same feelings and felt that you were better at this or that or the other thing. And you go, I never realized that at the time, that we were all feeling insecure.
Looking back, what strengths do you think that God gave you that helped you through those years?
I was surrounded by people who were great storytellers. And I loved to be with family, and there were certain family members who would hold court when we were all together, and they would entertain everyone. And there was always laughter, and there was always who's going to tell the best story and who tops it. And I absolutely loved that. I think it turned me into a storyteller. I think it enabled me to be able to explain things in fun and relevant ways that even as a teacher later on in life, to be able to want to connect at that kind of a level and to tell stories, not just impart facts, but how does this apply and how does it work in your life, and to be able to relate those things. I think that growing up in that kind of environment where people and family made you laugh and they made you want to know what was the moral of the story or what actually happened, and that laughter all the time made it fun to learn in those moments.
It's become kind of a thing now to, what would you go back and tell your younger self? If you could go back and talk to a young Jeff Denton going into high school, what advice would you give to yourself?
Well, I would tell myself to worry less. The anxiety that I had as a young person, as a teenager, and even as a young adult, again, it's all of that combined. It's to compare yourself against other people. It's to think you're not good enough. It was well into my 50s before I stopped biting my fingernails, an anxiety response that I had through most of my life, because I would lay in bed at night and worry. I would always think some stuff wasn't good enough, that I could always do things better. And I had a sign that hung in my office as a younger pastor that said, perfection is expected, excellence is tolerated. And I really lived that way, and I thought that was it. That's the ultimate goal, is to be perfect in everything. And didn't know until much later on, I remember ripping that off my door and going, this isn't healthy. To always expect yourself to be perfect doesn't allow for any grace. It doesn't allow for any imperfections. It actually doesn't even allow you to grow, because you always have to come across like you are perfect in that kind of a circumstance. And I really would tell my younger self to worry less about those things and to let go of perfection. I think that would be a big lesson that I wish I had learned earlier.
Yeah, I'm going to skip forward a little bit in time before we get into the leadership questions. You have an amazing wife.
Yes.
And I just wondered, what single focus, or what's the most important thing in a healthy marriage relationship?
I'm not a big fan of what one single thing kind of an answer, because I think things are often more complicated than is there one thing that will save your marriage? I honestly doubt that. But what I know is that early in our marriage, we decided to take walks together. And that time together was so important, to walk every evening, rain or shine, snow, sleet, whatever, that we would go out, and whether a half hour to an hour, we would just walk in our neighborhood or wherever we've lived at. And to have those times without devices, sometimes without kids around, sometimes we take the kids with us and walk as a family. To have those moments where we talked together without distractions, I think were the healthiest for our marriage. That and to go to bed at night and to turn off the lights and to talk in bed, that we learned that very young. That now my wife falls asleep very quickly, but I knew that it was a key moment when we could have those conversations and talk about what our day was, what do we have tomorrow. And to me, those moments of communication are the most important thing that we built a lasting relationship on.
I want to talk about some leadership lessons now. And I have told you this, I don't want to embarrass you, but you're one of the most remarkable leaders that I have had the privilege of serving under. So what do you think are the important qualities of an effective leader?
I think a really good leader is a cheerleader of those around him. I think to be able to identify that there are people who are doing well and to cheer them on in that vein. And sometimes people don't see it, and they think that I've had people assume that I'm mocking them when I compliment them in an area, or when you're trying to encourage someone in leadership a certain direction, and they don't see it in themselves. They don't necessarily always receive it as cheerleading. And some people even take it as criticism when you go, no, this is what you're great at, you should continue to grow in this area. And again, I understand, because in our own insecurities, we don't always take that in the most humble way that we could and actually allow it to help us grow. Sometimes we refuse to take those compliments. Mm-hmm. But I think a good leader who can cheerlead everyone around him and who can point to when things are going well, it's the result of this person and this person and this person. I think that's a leader who gains respect of those who follow along behind them.
When you started out your career, you started out in the secular world. What leaders impacted you when you started your career?
Well, early on, a couple of big names in broadcasting who hired me in my first radio job for reasons that I don't know, said to me, I want you to have this spot, I want you to have this program. And I was able to move very quickly up the ranks of news, and to be able to, then move to my own morning show and have people who would identify and go, oh, you're talented at this, I'm going to put you here. That made a big impact. Not always Christians. One of the things I learned from those an early boss of mine was manipulation of employees. And when I moved into management then, he would say, now here's what I want you to do. I want you to give each employee a bonus, but I want you to promise they don't tell anyone else, and tell them they're the only one getting the bonus, so that they think they're more special than anyone else. And I did that the first time, and I walked away and I went, I don't like that at all. I feel like I just played everyone against one another, and it wasn't fair. So I learned both some good and bad examples that go on especially in the secular broadcasting industry, to play egos against one another. Mm-hmm. And knew very early on that's not the way I wanted to play the game.
Again, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but what leadership principles in secular world, in radio, helped you then when you got into ministry leadership?
Well, I had taken a lot of responsibility at a very young age in broadcasting and moved into management, and I think that I learned, again, to listen to those who were older than me, to find those who had an expertise and to want to learn from them. That I've always been driven by finding those people who know things that I don't know, and wanting to know what they do know. How do I apply that? How do I get that? How do I lead like you lead? And to find people who would be willing to take that time meant a lot to me. And it's what allowed me to grow quickly, because I did. I listened, and I would apply those things.
What church leader has had the most, at any point in your career, has had the most positive impact on your ministry?
Well, I mentioned Ed Hahn, my
Right.
pastor during my teen years, who really formed me into the pastor I became, and gave me permission to have fun as a pastor, gave me permission to be able to laugh and to tell a joke, and to bring other people into that fun moment. But then in one of my first pastorates, that Dave Boyer, who was the lead pastor that I worked under in the Chicago area, he taught me so much. He was a fan of George Mueller, and so George Mueller's practice of just letting God provide every day. That Dave was a great prayer warrior. He was committed to the Word, and he would say, well, we'll just let the Lord work this out. To take some of that drive that I had to, no, let's make this happen, and to work alongside him when he would be sort of the opposite and go, no, let's just sit back and let God let God take the wheel, in essence, and let Him lead. Let Him resolve the battles. Let Him be the one who provides when we need it. And don't put all that weight on yourself to make things happen.
The ministry is hard. It's a hard career. What are some pitfalls that you see that pastors and church leaders encounter?
I'm really careful not to judge other leaders. I like to give other leaders the benefit of the doubt, even when I look at them and go, I wouldn't do it that way. But I think that it's very possible that many leaders, they're trying to protect themselves, maybe, instead of looking out for what's best for those around them. And I think it's very easy to fall into that trap, even in church leadership, and to make decisions that are based on what's best for me. And it can become a very egocentric thing. I know lots of pastors who make decisions even about moving churches, and I always said I would never leave a church without talking to the leaders first, that if these are the leaders who pray for me and who are gathered around me, then I would never do what I had other pastors did who worked for me, which is catch me off guard and they'd say, here's my letter of resignation, I've taken another church. And I would say, I didn't even know you were looking for. I didn't know you were dissatisfied. I didn't know you wanted to change your job description. We would do that in a heartbeat here for you if you would have let me know that you were looking for something else, because I would much rather you have stayed with us on the team. And I think that pastors get into this Lone Ranger mentality where I have to lead, I have to be perfect. No one can, no one can question my motives. No one can tell me what to do. And I think it's a very dangerous territory to land in as a pastor.
So I'm going to pretend that I'm a young pastor. That takes a lot of pretending for me to be young. But I'm just starting out. What would you tell me, a couple things you would tell me as I'm beginning that career?
Well, I think life lessons in general, one of the phrases that I've carried that was given to me early on is, this too shall pass. That, a bad sermon doesn't last forever. You know what, you preach next week and you got another chance to do it again. A bad board meeting doesn't mean that everything has gone wrong in your ministry. A bad conversation with someone, or someone who's leaving the church, or someone who doesn't like you. None of that is permanent. It will last for a season and then it moves on. And if you can let go of it and say, well, this too shall pass, that in those moments, what you find is the peace to be able to trust God that He's still in control.
We've gone through a difficult season in the church through the pandemic and other things. And why do you think that church leadership can be so difficult at times?
I think every pastor wants what's best for their church family, and every pastor wants their church family to be at their very best. And so it's difficult when you see people make bad decisions. Very early on in ministry, I would take that upon myself. And why can't I convince people of this? Why can't I convince people that this is the best route, or that this is the best choice for them? But I also learned very early on then, and this comes, from the world of counseling, where you'd give someone advice and here's some good counsel, and then they'd walk away and they'd do their own thing anyway. And as a leader, you feel like, I just gave you great advice, why didn't you follow this? And I look back at the model and the example of Jesus and the rich young man who comes to him, and Jesus tells him what he needs to do, and he walks away unchanged. And he's sad because he's not going to obey what Jesus told him to do. That I think that all of us who are pastors, when we see people who are choosing ways that aren't perfect, when they're choosing a way, a direction, or a choice in their relationship, and you know that this isn't godly, this isn't going to go well, I have to accept, if people could walk away from Jesus, if people could not take the advice of Jesus, then who am I to think that I'm better than He is, and that everyone will listen to all of my good advice?
When I've described you to other people, I've often described you as a point guard. You make everybody on the team better.
Well, I hope.
You do. So I know that's important to you. What's your strategy to develop leaders?
So what I've done for many years is I hand select every year a group typically of younger guys of whom I see great potential. That I can tell that they're a leader in the making, and probably are already they're probably already demonstrating leadership skills when I identify them. But I go, this is someone who I think in the long term I should invest in. And I would meet with that group of guys on a pretty much a weekly basis, and we would study leadership principles. We would study just biblical characteristics. What is a godly man? As well as a leader, because I think it's one and the same. What does a godly household look like? How do you use your words? How do you use your gifts and talents? And I would mentor that group, and I would get a 1-year commitment from them. We'd read some books together. They'd often come, and I'd discuss sometimes current things that were happening in the church that I think it would be good for them to get some insight behind, and how does a pastor think on these things. And we would get a 1-year commitment, and I would work with those guys. Now, the interesting thing is, especially when they're younger, they may not immediately go into a leadership role, but what I've seen is over the years, many of those young guys that I mentored eventually ended up on elder councils or in key leadership roles because they just needed someone to help them identify those skills and be able to encourage them and move them on. And then when that spot popped up, to go, okay, this is the role for you right now. That's been my main strategy. But out of that, every year I would do a risk event with them, where we would jump off, do a bungee jump, or go high-speed racing, or something like that. Because I think every leader has to be able to encounter risk and overcome the fear. I've often said it takes about 2 seconds of bravery to overcome a fearful moment, to start a conversation that's uncomfortable or to make a tough decision. All you need is that 1 second of bravery to say, okay, I'll do this, and take the step forward. And then once you start, there's no turning back. So we always do a risk event. I would tell them at the beginning of the year, you need to save up your money. We're going to go eat at a restaurant you probably don't typically eat at. It'll be very expensive, but we're going to take our wives out to a place to express to them that I couldn't do what I do without you. And so you're worth, some special investment, and to take you on a date night that is much more expensive than would typically do, because that's how valuable you are to what I do and enabled to do it.
I have to say, Jeff, that if you had asked me to go bungee jumping, I might have been like the rich young man. I might have turned and walked away.
I tell you what, I never had anyone in all the years of doing that who refused. Now, and I would give a couple of options, kind of a thing, and we'd decide as a group what we wanted to do. But by and large, every guy was willing to go. And I think some of that is a trust factor. That's a trust factor when we do the heights. I don't like heights. And so if we're going to do that, I did it with a group where we did a 16-story free fall into a net, where you're let go and you go down without being attached to a bungee cord. And that's uncomfortable. I didn't want to do it, but to say, I'll go. We'll overcome my fear. To do that high-speed racing, I got hit a couple times. I was driving and watching blood come up my knuckles as the air is going on. But you can't stop in that moment, because if you stop in the middle of a track, you're going to get hit again. Yeah. And so you have to immediately engage yourself and keep going. That I think that leaders who can find those moments of risk and go, boy, I gotta keep going. I can't stop. Because when you stop, and there are times where God tells you to stop, but most of the time, He says, don't be afraid of the moment. Keep moving forward. That's why I've put you in this role at this time. And we should all be practicing that, finding ways, trying new things, whether it's trying new food or having a new experience or doing something that's a little bit risky, so that you're engaging your heart and your mind to say, I really can do things that I thought before I couldn't do.
I've watched you as being a part of the fellowship here at Waterbrook, and I know that you really want the staff to be passionate about what Waterbrook is doing and what God is doing in our community. How do you motivate the staff? What are some of your philosophies or techniques to motivate them?
Boy, if I let out all my secrets, then they'll know when they're being manipulated. I don't want no, but The blessing is I've always been surrounded by incredible staff members. I don't have to do a lot of motivating when people are really good at what they do. All I have to do is release them to do what they need to do. And so we've done ministry initiatives here, and that has involved me just saying, okay, dream big, and what do you want to do? We've changed job descriptions, which is, okay, if your job was to change, what would it look like? We've taken the opportunity to do some things as a staff together. I think getting together to have lunch, getting together to do something fun together, to go out, to come in the afternoon and go, okay, we're all going for ice cream right now. To me, that's as important as buckling down and working to get an event done. That I've always been surrounded by staff who work really, really hard. I think a lot of times what they need is permission to laugh, or permission to let's have some fun for a little bit, or let's enjoy one another. And I am very much blessed to be able to be with staff here in Chicago, previously as well, with people who enjoy having fun. One of the things we did in Chicago for 20 years is we had our staff meeting together, and we would pray, we'd have our meeting agenda, and then we would go and play ping pong for an hour every week. It was just to have fun and build those relationships. Here a little bit more recently at Waterbrook, we'll have a staff meeting, and then I'll pull out a deck of Uno cards and say, we're just going to play a couple of rounds and have some fun. And you find out who's competitive and who's not, and who, who's more strategic. And to do those kind of things and have some fun together, I think is important. I think that creates unity in a staff, to say we can laugh together, and it builds that opportunity that I really care about you, because you're not just an employee here, you're a friend of mine.
You know, as a pastor, as a lead pastor, there are moments when people do or say unkind things, and that has to be hurtful. How do you stay encouraged through those moments?
I think, first of all, I'm too egotistical to let it bother me. That, I do believe that God is at work, and that God has called me to the role that I'm in, and you don't change that just because we have a difference. I think that to make it through those difficult moments, you also have to just stay close to the Lord and trust that God's in control. If I'm in control, and there have been periods of my ministry where I'm trying to wrestle control, that pushes you to the place of insecurity, because I can't change anyone's heart. Only God can do that. But when I'm humble and I go, okay, well, Lord, this is your ministry, it's not mine. That I've gone to the elders, and the elders will say, no, we don't like that idea. We want to go a different direction. If I can't accept that, and if I can't accept that God is with me in the moments when I get everyone's endorsement and everyone's on the same board and we're going the same direction, and I trust that process, that God leads in that moment, then how can I not trust it if everyone that I just trusted who said yes, if they all think no, and it's a different answer, then who am I to now go, well, now I don't trust that process anymore? That you have to choose a lane, pick a lane, and pick whether you choose those leaders that you're surrounded by or not. And what I find is when I've gone through, and you have the positive equity built up together, and these are men and women who love me, who care about me, and so I'm not scared of them disagreeing with me. I'm not scared of them telling me no. I'm not scared of them having a different idea in any moment, because we've built up enough trust and love between one another at the other times that it creates a safety zone for a grace challenge, as we call it every once in a while, where you get to call me out and tell me you disagree with that.
When you look back over your pastoral career, what are a couple of the things that God really moved in your heart and changed that maybe you didn't expect when you started out?
I think when I started out, and my basic personality is too much, too fast. I think that God really taught me that, and sometimes the hard way, sometimes through job reviews. But early on, I remember getting a job review and hearing these so-and-so, or we're hearing from people that you don't care about them. And I go, why not? I'm working really hard. Well, because you pass people in the hall on a Sunday morning and you don't talk to them. Well, that's because I'm on my way to take care of something. I have a lot to do. Do they know that? And to learn that there are just people who need that moment and need that affirmation. And too much, too busy, too fast have been lessons that I've had to continue to learn. And interestingly, in this season when I've gotten sick and it slowed me down and I can't go like I used to, it's only because I learned those lessons that I'm able to go, okay, we're going to do the best we can with what we got, and I will get done what I can get done, and I just have to let go of everything else. Again, I've had a workaholic tendency my entire life. I've always felt there's more to do. There's more to get done. There's more that I have to make sure gets finished. And when I'm able to say, Lord, help me get through what you want me to do today. Help me to notice the people you want me to notice. Help me to love well. Those things, I think, have become more important and have changed over my career.
I know you said that you don't like to judge others, and I really appreciate that. But you also observe as you see pastors and leaders. And what are some common mistakes that sometimes pastors make in shepherding their flock?
I think a common mistake is based on insecurity, is that we don't trust people. And people will hurt their pastor unintentionally. They'll say something, or they will, or when people leave a church, it's very hurtful. And I've had to learn along the way to try and not take things so personally. That most people aren't thinking about how their decision will impact me. It's not I'm going to try and get Jeff to do this. They're just thinking about themselves and whether that's a good or bad decision. To know that they think this is the best for them is something that when I accept that, and I see other pastors who struggle with that, they assume that this church member is out to get them, or this board is out to get them. And I truly think that's not the case most of the time. It's our own insecurities that make us afraid of that. And part of that problem is I go home and discuss things with my wife. And boy, this happened in a conversation with an elder or a staff member or something like that. And I'm trying to process this. And then to go back the next day, and you as staff members or you with that elder resolve that. And suddenly it's like, oh, I misunderstood that. Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. We're all good with that. If I forget to go home and talk to my wife and say, hey, this is all resolved and it's good, and what would make me, because it's out of my mind now, I've taken care of this. One of the things that I think that happens is now I go back home and my wife is still worried about that. And she now has a burr in her saddle against that fellow employee or against that elder or something. And it was my responsibility to come and make sure that got resolved, and I didn't do that. I think that pastors all the time in different churches, they walk around and they don't know how to decompress things, so they they blow off steam the wrong way, or they talk to the wrong person. They're not seeking wisdom, they're seeking affirmation for what their viewpoint is, instead of actually seeking wisdom, which is true of all of us. And if I was to speak to those other leaders in other churches, I'd say, can you trust God that He's still in control? Can you ask Him for wisdom? Can you find the wisdom in the criticism that you just got? Is there something legitimate to it? Not just, do you have to be angry at that person now because they've become the villain in your story?
I wonder I was going to ask you what unexpected insight that God has brought into your life that's helped you as a leader. And I wonder if your diagnosis might be a part of that answer, that you've learned something from your cancer diagnosis that's changed you as a leader.
My diagnosis has slowed me down. And I've learned a lot in this season of my life. I can't do what I used to do. And I used to be proud to be first one in, last one out of the office, that I wore that as a badge of honor. And I can't do that anymore. I don't have the energy. And B, I don't have the time. I have to go in for treatments every day, and I'm taking medications that knock me out at times, and I'm just so sick at other times that I can't be in the office, and I've had to depend and rely more on those around me. I've had to delegate more, which has always been a poor quality of mine. I've had to trust other people to make decisions that I would make, not because I'm the only one who could make it, I'm realizing, but by default, it's come to me because I'm a decision maker, and ask me a question, I've got an opinion on everything. I can help you make that decision. As I've had to step back and intentionally sort of been pulled back physically, what I've learned is that it's okay to let other people make decisions more often. And I've learned that their decisions are almost always right, that they didn't need my input to make it happen.
We're in a challenging cultural climate right now, just as far as the corporate church in America. What do you think are the main challenges in this climate?
I think the drive to be relevant is always something that burdens the church. And we're called to be the church. We're not called to be relevant. We're called to be true to who God has called us to be as believers. I'm called to be a follower of Christ. I'm not called to be a follower of anything else in this world. I also think that the church can get too cultural. I'm not sure, I'll have someone make a comment, and it's a political comment one way or the other, and they will say it or make a joke about it. And my thought is, you just offended half of the congregation, because there are half the people here who think differently than you do. And I've always tried to stay away from that in the pulpit, and even mostly in personal conversations, that I think we try and be too cultural. My role is not to make political statements. My role is not to tell you who to vote for. My role isn't even to tell you which political party is right and wrong, because I see God use all kinds of people that I agree and disagree with. And what happens is, when I feel that my role as a pastor is to be culturally relevant and to make people think like I think, it pushes me to say and do things that are contrary to the gospel. And if I'm to love everyone, well, when I make a comment that's political, even if I just think it's a throwaway joke about something, I've just hurt some people around me that I didn't even know I hurt in that comment. And so I've tried to be less and less culturally, politically, economically relevant, and to stick more and more with what Jesus calls us to, and that's to love people.
So what encourages you about what God is doing in the church today?
I see God getting us back to basics. I see Him in the next generation. They want less production in church, and they want more truth. That we're seeing surveys and studies now of boomers who are leaving churches, and they were the ones who demanded a certain model, 20, 30, 40 years ago. They wanted the church to feel more like culture. They wanted to hear the songs on the radio. They wanted their pastor to be flashy like the TV is. And what we're finding is those people are leaving many of those churches, and they're saying on their way out, what I want is a place that is spiritually relevant, not culturally relevant. And I think that that's become a very difficult thing for us as pastors to navigate. I think that, I was a worship pastor back when we went through what they called the worship wars, which was the opportunity to move away from just a piano and organ and singing, and to be able to use a guitar or a set of drums or other instruments in worship. Well, when you take that 40 years down the road, and boy, I had to fight for that to happen. Suddenly, now I'm fighting for something that's a 40-year-old movement, instead of going, well, what now is relevant for people? What now is different? Because I fought to get this. I think preachers do that. I fought to be able to use an overhead projector, so I could write notes out and do something cool during the sermon. And that may not be relevant anymore. Can I let go of what makes me irrelevant today and continue to change to be part of the culture and and to create a church environment that is open and welcoming and that people come into and they go, yes, this is a place where God exists. Not, this is a place where we tell you God exists.
Yeah, I want to move swiftly away from the criticism of baby boomers. I'm not sure why. Now, what do you wish that each church member maybe understood or embraced a little bit more about their role in the success of the community and the church?
I think church members don't realize when they aren't engaged 100% that they rob the church and the rest of the church family. I think they don't understand that their role is so important, whether it is serving, giving, praying with people, using your spiritual gifts, that God brings us together into a church family, and we're all to be 100% who we are in that. And if we push away in any part of that, I'm not going to give, I'm not going to serve, I don't need to be here regularly, and we push away all of that, that we're robbing the church from why God put me here. You know, I think it's easy for someone to look at a pastor and go, well, clearly, here's your gifts and here's what you're supposed to be doing. You get paid to do this. I think what they don't realize is I'm here because I'm gifted and God has called me to be here, just like you have as a church member. And we're called into this all together, and we all have a role to play. If I don't play my role, then the church is less than it can be.
We'll talk a little bit now about the church that you have shepherded for many years. What are some qualities that you love about your congregation at Waterbrook?
I love that the congregation at Waterbrook is, and in one of our distinctives we talk about being a fluid culture and that people allow us to change things. I remember very early on when we were still meeting back at the school at Dodd Elementary, and on a Sunday morning we had the projectors up front didn't work, and I had a sermon that day that depended upon what was going to be on the screen, and and the question was, well, what do we do about this? And I don't know if you remember when I did this, but that Sunday morning we got to the sermon and I said, I picked up the stand and I walked to the back of the cafeteria and I had everyone turn around their chairs and face the back, because we had a screen in the back and that was the only one that was working. And to be able to do that, and suddenly everyone who was in the back row when the service started is now on the front row. That people do those things good-naturedly. That we had a week where a transformer blew here and power goes out in the auditorium. Well, there's no electronics, there's no anything else. We had to open the doors to let light in from the outside, and that's how we did worship that morning, and it was beautiful. I think that to be able to be fluid in our culture and to say we can roll with whatever it is. And I think that's true whether it's staff or whether it's how we do certain areas of ministry, that we let God lead into new ways. We let God change us over time. We let God make us something new, that we don't have to be exactly who we were 20 years ago or 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, that there are new people here, that we're reaching new people now, that the staff has adapted and grown and changed. So should the church, and the congregation at Waterbrook has always been embracing about that and has allowed us to change over the years.
When you came to Waterbrook from Illinois, I know you had some other opportunities, another church that was interested in you coming there. What did you pray that God would do when you came here as a lead pastor?
I had been 20 years in Chicago and one church, and I said, okay, Lord, if I'm going to come here, give me 20 years at this next church. That'll carry me close to retirement, and then maybe I'll do, adjust my career, do something different. That's really what I asked the Lord for. It was longevity. Give me plenty of time. I've always believed in longevity of ministry, and a pastor who stays more than the average 5 to 7 years that a pastor stays in many churches. And I didn't want to be that pastor. I wanted to be the one who stayed, and that people knew that I'm committed to this congregation. I'm committed to this church family. I'm not just here until I find the next step on the ladder. I'm here for the long run. I'm here because I want to be here. I'm here because God has sent me here. So I dare you to take me away from that unless God calls me away, I'm here. And that's been very clear to me. And God has not yet called me away and out of that position.
You know, anytime there's a church plant or a startup, it can be a little bit kind of chaotic. So what has blessed you, and what areas of growth at Waterbrook since that church in a box time that we had? What has blessed you in growth areas at Waterbrook?
I think to see new people who've come in and gotten involved, and the ways in which we're innovative, the ways in which we reach out to the community, that we have schools come in here and we do a lunch for them to start off the school year, and that we throw a party for teachers like that we are out at the rodeo, that we're out at Bluegrass on Ballard, that we're out in the community. To me, those things are so important, and to see the church continue to grow in those areas. And often I get credit for saying, well, that's Jeff's influence. But no, I couldn't do it if it wasn't for everyone who comes alongside and makes those things happen. Those events are too big for just me, that they are church-wide things that we make happen, that we reach out to people. I think the growth of missions and my involvement to be able to go and to teach around the world, and I credit, Dr. Bramer very early on. There was a week that he couldn't go teach at Word of Life in Hungary, and he asked if I would be willing, if they would accept me to fill in for him. And boy, that opened a door to teaching in Europe, and that I carried on to this day, that gave me a way that this church is supported to go out and to build into the next generation of missionaries and pastors, and not just locally, but globally like that. And to be involved in countries where we have worked with orphanages, where we have built schools, and to look at that and go, this is pretty amazing that a little church in Wiley has such a global impact. That we have an impact in our outreach here in our community, and that we have an impact around the world, and that Waterbrook would send pastors and mission teams and allow us to go. To me, that's really important. I appreciate the format here that allows me as lead pastor to do more than just preach every Sunday. That I have weeks off where I get to sit in the congregation and be fed, and I have many friends who are pastors in ministry who are worn out from preaching every week. And by the grace of God and what Waterbrook allows, there are some of those pastors that I've gone and I've preached for them so that they can get a week or two of vacation, because they don't have in their congregation, like we do, plenty of preachers who could stand up and fill the pulpit any given Sunday, and no one will even notice that Jeff has been gone. And to have a church family that allows the pastors here to minister in other areas and to other congregations and at other places in the world, that's a great stewardship of staff, in my opinion.
I know that you will make this a positive challenge. So what challenge would you issue to our congregation and to any congregation to be salt and light in this community?
I think it's the command to love one another. I think it's much more simple than we make it to be. How do we need to do this? How do we need to structure? What cool events do we need to do? I think it begins and ends with loving one another. And if we're trying to love our community, God will lead us to what we need to do. If I'm trying to love people within the congregation, God will open the doors to do that. It's only if I'm not listening do I get stuck going, I don't know how to reach new people. I don't know how to reach the congregation. I don't know how to get new people into the church. If I'm loving well, then those things happen naturally. I think we make church growth, we make mission endeavor, we make inviting someone to church so much more difficult than it needs to be. What we need to be, number one, is loving. And the more loving I am, the more attractive, and Scripture says this, the more attractive I am to the world, and that they will see God in that love. Well, then that's clearly what I need to be doing.
I know I have thought about this in my own career. What do you pray and hope that your legacy will be here at Waterbrook and in your ministry career overall?
I hope I'm remembered as someone who loved people well. As I'm going through this diagnosis, and as it's taken me out of so much, as it's caused me to do less, to be at home more, not to run around, not to have as many meetings. One of my fears is that here in the last season of my life, people will forget that I have tried to be loving and tried to be there for people. And that's a difficult thing to do, to say, oh, I wish I was there, or to refer someone, as I just did in the last 24 hours, okay, well, let me connect you with one of the pastors who will be able to help you through this, because I know I don't have the energy to help you through this situation right now. That I hope that people remember that I was loving, that I cared. Building buildings and getting property and the things that we've done to grow a location aren't as important. Okay, when I'm gone, make sure you give me a plaque with a memorial urinal or something in the bathroom, that you remember that I was here, kind of a thing. But I would hope that people would say, Jeff genuinely loved people. And, the big thing is that I took God very seriously, and myself much less so. That's what I hope people remember about me, that yeah, he had fun, he wore goofy clothes, he didn't care what people thought a lot of the time, but he really, really, really loved God, and that the Word of God was important, and prayer was important, and worship was important, and missions was important, and reaching new people was important, and that Jeff had friends who came into church who were really deep sinners that he invited from the community, and the Waterbrook family loved them and loved them well. That I hope that's what people will remember about me.
I know that you probably don't like this question, but let's assume that you're a part of this, I hope, for a while. What vision do you have for Waterbrook going forward? Where are you praying that this congregation goes in the next year and several years?
It's all the same answer. I hope the congregation becomes more and more loving. That if that happens, it will solve a lot of the other questions. But I see in the years ahead, as I'm taken off the board at some point, I'm removed as a player in the game, that someone new will come in, someone new will take my place, and that's okay. I hope that those things are a new transition. I had already, had been talking about, and my goal was by the time I reached 60, that's probably a time for me to not be the lead pastor anymore. It's probably time for someone else to come in and let me switch to a new role. I want to be involved in the process of being something different. But if God would bless me with those years to get to that stage, that was sort of that 20-year mark. If I could make it, to 60, then let me be, a teaching pastor and take on a lesser role, and let a new leader come in and start to provide vision and lead in new ways. That to me, that's what would be happening next. We'd be starting those conversations. Because of my diagnosis and of the way things look, it comes across very different now. I mean, there probably will be a new lead pastor, and I'll have no say in the process, and that individual will come in, and what I would say to the congregation is, let Jeff die. That when Jeff's taken off the board, don't make anything here a memorial to me. We do this way because this is how Jeff did it. That's nails in the coffin of a church to say that. I want then there to be new and fresh leadership who comes along, including some of our current staff. I'm not just talking about a whole new slate. I'm talking about let there be new voices that rise up and start to lead in new ways. And that what I hope is someone will go, oh, Jeff would be all for that. That Jeff would be excited by that this is something new, and it's going to be different. and that Jeff would be the first one on the sidelines going, yes, and being the cheerleader and going, yeah, let's do that. Let's be different. Let's try something new. Let's do a new ministry initiative, and let's see where God takes us from there. I think that's, if that could be what carries on after I'm gone, and people could take that and let Jeff and everything he did, and the way he preached, and the way he led things, let those things die, and let new vegetation grow up in place of that. Let me be the fertilizer that goes in the ground, and let the new spring up. That to me would be an ideal legacy for me.
Can we keep your wardrobe around?
There will be a garage sale when I go. My wife has already said that, and a few of the items have already been spoken for. It's funny that is all just part of the fun persona, but that I have, I'm colorblind, and so it's always been a joke. I have poor taste in clothing, and over the years, it used to be just ties, crazy ties that I wore. And then as we wore less ties and more other things, that to be able to have, again, a congregation who can laugh along with that. And, on Christmas Day this year showed up, and some of the younger people who showed up in fun Christmas stuff and came up and were so proud that they dressed like Pastor Jeff did. It goes back to discipleship and people following you a certain way. And I'm going to go, ultimately, at the end of the day, I hope no one ever dresses like me. That's never been my goal. But to have people say, we wanted to look like you, boy, what an encouragement that is, because that's the role of discipleship. And what I hope is that I look more like Jesus, and that as you follow me, that you're looking more like Jesus, that I'm pointing to Jesus, and that I'm leading you towards Jesus. And so ultimately, behind all the facade and all the fun and everything else is someone who deeply, deeply loves Christ, and that passes that on to those who are following the footsteps, even if they choose to dress a little weird.
I'm going to go off script. I'm going to ask you one more question. You have been such a blessing to me in how you have been a light in such what is honestly a very dark season of your life, in the infusion lab and in other ways. And so just as a word of encouragement to people that are going to go through adversity, because we all will, how has God moved in your life to allow you to be light even when it's dark?
I would say the number one thing is what I said to the doctor when he told me that I had cancer, and that was that I've had a good life and I'm walked with the Lord. I'm not perfect, but I'm here because God has led me here. And at every step along the way where I think it's been a big juncture and where I've needed to figure out where is God leading next, I've worked really hard and diligently and prayed and sought the Lord to make sure, is this the next step I'm supposed to take? And so to be at a place where I believe I'm exactly here right now at the place, with access to the doctors, with access to medical care where I'm supposed to be, that I want to be at this place. I would rather have cancer and be in the center of God's will than be perfectly healthy and be outside of His will.